Welcome to another Observability Clinic, another tips and tricks community session, episode number 9 already. And today it's all about Dynatrace configuration as code with Monaco, some advanced use cases that Monaco 2.0 now enables thanks to some of the changes that have been made from Monaco 1.0 to 2.0. I'm not the expert. I always invite the experts, the people that have the tips and tricks. Ajay, welcome
Hey,
back.
how's it going, Andy? Yeah,
Very,
thank you.
very good. Hey, you are always doing amazing things because people may not know, but you are obviously a lead technical product consultant, but you helped me a lot over the last months and years on engaging with the community that I work with. And you've built a lot of cool things. You shared it on GitHub and you're doing a lot of work with Monaco. And that's why I'm so excited that I always learn a lot from you. And that's why I'm excited to have you back. And I'll let you go into what tips and tricks do you have for us and for the community on advanced use cases with Monaco 2.0?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, so getting into advanced use cases with Monaco. I mean, the biggest thing here is that Go templating is actually supported. We'll talk about a lot about what Go templating is, and then how we can utilize Go templating to come to a solution with Monaco that will support very advanced scenarios. Now that we have a lot of our configurations as APIs are moving over to the settings 2.0 endpoint, the objects and schemas have become a little bit more complex, and Go templating definitely helps fix that use case, or support that use case, I should say. Go templating uses common conditionals like if else, the range command, and then we'll look at a combination of both of those two.
Cool. And then the Go templates, this is something that I as I said earlier, I followed some of your discussions that you had internally, and I said, Go templates, wow, this is amazing what this all enables. Because you can do much more complex things in less declarative code.
Exactly.
Because you can add custom logic. So I know you have a lot of links and examples later on as well. But folks, if this is new for you, Go templates, I think you also have a great website that you show us to help actually kind of get familiar with Go templates.
Yeah, exactly.
And what the output is. It's awesome. So don't be shied away. If this is something new, you're going to learn something really cool and amazing.
Yeah. So Go templates is actually a package that's built into the Go library that helps to dynamically generate text as well as dynamically generate HTML. In our scenario, we're going to focus on the text-based content. We're going to use Go templates to recreate our JSON objects that will be used by Monaco to then push that settings configuration to Dynatrace. So there's also the idea of action sequences and controls of the actual formatting via Go templates, like those if statements and those ranges. There's quite a lot of use cases that I will show today, and then I'm sure there's a lot more that I'm not going to cover today. We're going to start with kind of a scenario where I had a project that we actually covered before for the SLO automation. This project, if you see the video, it's very complex to actually understand what is all going on. I had to, with the previous version of Monaco, build out separate projects for each and every entity and then every SLO type that I wanted to generate. Applying Go templating on this, I was able to come up with a solution where I have a single project called SLO, and in that config YAML, you can manage what entity and or what SLO type to push for that entity. So yeah, it'll definitely reduce the number of lines of code that you have to manage. Obviously, it makes it a little bit more complex when you're looking at the object.json. So here we want to just mention that, yes, Go templating will help facilitate some of these advanced use cases. However, we cannot guarantee support if you're having issues with your Go templating in your Monaco projects. Monaco supports Go templating, but because of how complex those JSONs can get, we don't directly support or guarantee support for your advanced use cases of Monaco where you have Go templating involved.
And I assume there is, when it comes to Go templating, it's a big community, it's a big project already. So I'm sure there are other communities out there in case people have questions around Go templating and want to do some troubleshooting on whether it's Go template itself is the problem.
Yep.
Then there are communities out there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the website I'm going to show you allows you to dynamically look at your Go templating and make sure the resulting text is what you expect, or in this case, JSON. So I'll show how to utilize that. So starting with the first scenario where we're dealing with a simple if-else condition. The content or the syntax looks something like this. There's going to be two sets of curly braces, the if command, and then your condition. In this case, we're just saying if a field name is true or false, and then if it's true, we do action number 1. If it's not true, we do action number 2. So here are some examples. You can have a single condition. You can have multiple conditions. And then we can support, or Go templating supports and or to separate the multiple conditions or comparisons there. And then let's kind of bake this Go templating into a JSON. And this is kind of how it looks. You have your JSON, and then in this scenario, we're testing to see if the entity type here is of app, as well as if the SLI equals perf. If so, then we will add, or Go templating then adds the following key value pairs to the resulting JSON. So previous, we would have had to write multiple JSONs to facilitate this. If the entity was of a different type, or if the SLI was of a different type. Now in Go templating, we could have an endless scenario of if and else, or if conditions that will parse the JSON and result using the same configuration without the need of multiple JSONs. Going on to range. So range is going to allow us to iterate over a list of key value pairs. General syntax, you have range, and then we're creating 2 variables here. The first variable is actually your index. So there's certain scenarios where it helps to understand the index. Definitely when you're trying to manage where to place a comma. Obviously, we need to make sure the JSON is valid at the end of the Go templating. So one way to manage where a comma is placed is by tracking the index, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then we're creating another variable here, which allows us to access all the elements in a given list. So let's say we have this payload as an example. We have a dictionary custom error rule of key value, or a list of key value pairs. And then looking at the JSON, we're ranging over that list. We then have the key value pairs. And so for every new list, you'll have a resulting dictionary in your JSON output. And then finally, using the range and the if conditional in the same example. So here is that example, that same range, but we're introducing the if statement. In this case, we're checking to see the I, which again is your index. And if we're at the first item of the list, this will obviously be 0. So this will not pass. So whatever action here will not happen on the first go. That is helpful because for a valid JSON of a list of dictionaries, you need to make sure you're putting in the comma at the right place. Obviously, you don't want the comma at the beginning of the list because that's not a valid JSON. So in this case, the first go through this list, we will not have a comma. However, the next go we will. And we have it at the beginning because once we finish, we don't want to put a comma at the end of the list as well. So this handles both. This makes sure we're putting the comma at the right place.
It's a very elegant solution. And I mean, as a software engineer by trade, I love this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really powerful. And I know you said, and now I understand why you were able to reduce the number of code files and configuration files from initial examples so much. I know for some this may look very complex, but you know, with I guess with powerful toolkits and templating engines like this, obviously there's some complexity with it, but it really reduces once you understand them. The overall complexity, a lot of copy pasting goes away essentially, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of templating. Yeah.
Exactly. And then obviously, as I've come more accustomed to this, I found repetitive use cases. So I'm able to just go from one config and copy over some of the syntax over and just change some things, and it works pretty well. It's not like each project you're having to relearn. You can definitely reuse some of the things that you've built out for previous configurations. And that's helped me go from a project that took me maybe 30 minutes to build out to 5 minutes, knowing how to now utilize some of these conditionals.
And I assume in your yeah, here we go. I was just saying something is missing here, but here we go.
Yeah. So we're ranging over that list. Again, the first time we enter the list, this I is 0 because that's the first index. This comma will not be added. So then only thing that's added is the rest here. And then the second time around, this will be 1. So we'll add a comma. We'll add at the beginning because if you kind of can picture what's happened the first time around, we now have a list of custom error rules for the first set of items, which are separated by these curly braces. Now we are getting to the second item. For a valid JSON, we need to have that comma. So we'll add that comma because the index is 1. We'll add the rest of the dictionary here, and then that will be the end of the range because we've come to the end of our list here. So I'll show kind of what that looks like in our demo actually. So so those are the use cases that I've come up with, the if and the range. There's a lot more complex things in Go templating that aren't supported, like creating functions and creating variables outside of these commands. Obviously, those don't fit the use case of Monaco. So what we support or what Monaco allows for is these ranges and these ifs. And then obviously, if you're programming in Go yourselves, you may be familiar with the Go templating use cases as well. So for now, we'll just keep it at these functions. Okay. Cool. I think the next thing is actually the demo. Yeah. Okay, so the way I wanted to start the demo is actually starting by the configuration that we're going to end up using Monaco to deploy. So we're going to start with a settings schema for the settings for services, where we're dealing with the failure detection and specifically the general parameters. This is a great use case for this because a lot of these exceptions are optional, right? You can either add a class or add a message or both or not, or one of the two. If you could imagine the JSON for this, we would have to specifically write out for every, without Go templating, we would have to write out a JSON for each different use case, where we would have maybe 3 different types of exceptions. You could imagine that would take 3 different JSONs to just come up with a solution to support the settings object. Instead, we will use Go templating to make it easier to manage this deployment. So if that didn't make sense here, let's say if I add an exception here and then add a message and then I add if I look at now the JSON, what that looks like. So now we have a list of key value pairs. And if I didn't have Go templating, I would have to write a JSON for each one of these. Let's say we have a scenario where we have only one exception. We would have to write a JSON for, or a object JSON for that scenario. And then if we wanted two, we would have to write a second JSON that matches the two scenario, three, and that significantly expands over the amount of exceptions that you're trying to now add to this configuration. So if you can imagine what we just did with that range, we could have a single JSON that ranges over a list of key value pairs that will then build out our JSON for us instead of us managing three different JSONs.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep, so that's the goal. For now, I'm gonna focus on the custom error rule section here. And what that looks like is actually this here. So we have a custom error rules list of dictionaries. Each dictionary has the keywords request attribute and then a condition, which could either be an integer or a string. And then based on which option we choose, there's different options for the key value pairs. So this is going to be our end result. We're going to try to use Go templating to build this out for us. And to do that, we have, or there is a tool that I found that allows us to, in real time, understand or help us build out our Go templating. So we have a JSON input. Obviously, Monaco supports a YAML input. So we need a tool to configure our YAML to JSON. And here's another tool where we can input our YAML. In this case, these two things mean the same thing. We have a key of list or a list of key value pairs. And then on the JSON result, we have that output. So the only reason we need to do this is because this tool here supports JSON and not YAML. So now that we got that out of the way, let's take a look at what we have so far. So I have just a kind of building blocks for our JSON where we have a JSON of a list key here, and this is our output on the right. So the first thing we need to do in this case is we have a range, right? We want to iterate over this range or this list. And to do that, we can introduce our range keyword. So I'm just going to copy and paste that over here. So now we have introduced that range. And for example, if I wanted to just list out everything in that range, I can say, we need two curly braces. So obviously this is a dictionary, so the output is a map. And we need to now access those endpoints or the keys in that map. The first thing we said is we needed to manage our comma, right? So if I were to just say something like this, let's see, that might get a little complex, but so here we don't have a comma. If I were to copy this output and try to validate that JSON, this would be an invalid JSON because we're missing our commas, right? So we need to figure out a way to add our comma. Obviously, you can't just add a comma at the end of because now you have a comma here. And if I were to test this, obviously this would be an incorrect JSON as well. So how do we now manage that comma? Obviously, we don't want to hard code it into our range. The way we want to manage that comma is actually using that if conditional. And we want to test the index and add the comma if the index is not zero, right? So then we add that. So now if we look at the result, we only have the comma at the beginning of the first or the second item in the list. We don't have it at the beginning of the first item, and we don't have it at the end of the second item. So if I were to test this JSON, we should have a valid JSON. So now Monaco would be able to actually deploy this JSON, and it would build out our, and if you were to actually look at the two side by side, they should match, right? We have a request attribute, we have a request attribute, condition. In this case, we have the integer scenario. So if I go back to the Go templating, it might be a little bit complex here, but I actually have all the different possible options for, in this case, the custom error rule, where if it's an integer, we expect the key to be int value. If it's a string, it needs to be text value. If it's a double, the key needs to be double value. And this is just some of the schema. This is just due to the schema that's used for this for the settings. So understanding the schema from the beginning is very helpful to understand what the options are when you're building out your Monaco project. So that's what I had to do, is I had to look at the schema for this settings and go through the schema and figure out every possible option, and then added that into my Go templating here. So yeah, any questions on that so far? Hopefully I didn't lose you.
No, you didn't lose me.
Okay.
I know this is super advanced, obviously, for people that have never done anything with Go templating or that are not familiar with the Dynatrace API Monaco, right? This is really makes sense if you are familiar with all of these concepts and you want to just leverage the power of templating. For me, the question though is, you come up with all of these templates here for certain schemas. Would it make sense, hopefully for us, to then provide a template list of templates?
Right. So it's funny that you mentioned that. I actually have started a GitHub repo for just that, building out templates for every single possible, what I call it, for every single possible settings and configuration object in Dynatrace. Here in the Dynatrace configuration as code samples, I have a project called Dynatrace Template Hub, which is the goal of this project was to support in every single settings and objects configuration schema. And in here, I have a couple so far. Obviously, there's more than 150 different settings. It'll take me some time to get through them all, but yeah, I have a couple already available options. If you look at the README, if you scroll all the way down, these are all the templates that I have supported so far. A couple of them are groupings. So a certain field menu in the settings objects has multiple different submenus, and those are supported here. So for example, for the Kubernetes anomaly detection global settings, you can manage the cluster settings, the namespace, node, workload, persistent volume claim. Monaco allows you to group projects together, and you can simply use the keyword Kubernetes anom and then the thing that you're trying to manage, and then that will trigger that certain project of Monaco. So yeah, so this is a repo that I'm going to continue to build on as there are more and more settings to deal with. So, yep.
How do I use this now? Like, can you show? I mean, you did a great way of explaining all of this, but how would this then look like if I want to create and set these settings using the power of templating engine?
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to my starting use case where we're dealing with the failure detection of a service. I have that as one of my supported projects so far. So this is that project. On the left here is the config.yaml. I've added some comments for each of the different key parameters that you're going to need to add, and kind of the expectation of the fields that are expected based on the Go templating.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, I have the settings schema for the failure detection service general parameters. This lives in a project called service, and in that project, there's a sub-project called general failure detection.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to name these things very similar to what the name is in Dynatrace for the settings object. And the expectation here is each one will have a starting configuration with some comments that you can work off of. You would come to these configs and either copy and add a new configuration or edit the one that exists already. These settings, in this case, is specific to a service. And then each of the parameters manages what the result is. So you just need to match the parameter to the JSON. In this case, if we want to enable or disable the configuration for the service, that will be managed by this enabled. Most, if not all, of the settings objects has this functionality where you can disable or enable using a single keyword. And then each of these keys represents a different configuration in the JSON. The one that we looked at was the custom error rule. In this case, we wanted to add some custom error rules to that settings object, just to make sure my work is actually done. Let me just delete these. And so now this is the default setting where it's disabled and there's no rules. So that we've disabled that, we come to the config and add the request attributes and the configurations that we want to manage in our config here. In this case, I've also added the success forcing exceptions and the ignore exceptions and the custom handled exceptions, just to show you that this one configuration is allowing me to manage all those different configurations in the settings schema. And then each of those is represented here on the right in the JSON. Focusing on the custom errors, we again have that range, that scenario where we're managing our comma, and then the resulting dictionary here. So the expectation is you will manage your configuration YAML. There's no need to touch the JSON. It will already have everything that the schema supports built into it, like you can see here, where we have the different types of request attributes managed and the conditions. I will support that. You will just have to manage the configuration here, which is, I think it's a valid exception thing to do. Is this is what you're going to fit your use case, you would have to manage these values here. And the comments are here to help you understand what each of the keys expects in this case. If you read it, we have a key called IGN accept, which is replacing ignored exceptions, and it expects these fields, which is a list of exceptions and then a list of key value pairs.
And you
So
said what you're working on with your project is that basically the template on the right, this is something that you are publishing with an example on the left as well, because then not everybody needs to go through the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll have an example config already baked into it with these comments that help you understand what's expected for that given key. So once you've built out your config, you can then running Monaco deploy. Obviously, you'll need a manifest file, which is your environment, and then it contains all your projects. And then in this case, we want to reference the service project, which is here, and then specifically the general failure detection, which is this project here, and then we want to paste it to a given environment. So we could run that. That will go ahead and run. It looks like it ran without any errors. Oh, glad it did that. And now if we go over to our Dynatrace environment and I refresh this page, we expect to see all our first, we've overwritten the global failure detection. We now have a settings object for this given service. We added our success forcing exceptions, ignored custom handled exceptions, and then finally coming to our request attributes, what we started with, we can now see we have it correct. We are given the request attributes, the conditions will change, and then the value will change. And now we have the exact JSON that we started with. Now we can see we have a single JSON that's actually doing that for us. We did not have to manage multiple JSONs to handle the different amount or number of custom errors. All that logic is built into the JSON to manage what type of condition and keywords to use in those keys. And yeah, so that's kind of the result is now we have Go templating that makes it much easier in a way to manage our JSONs. We can add all the logic into or bake it into the JSON itself.
Yeah, really, really powerful. And then I think the especially for folks that are, I guess, used to other configuration as code solutions, right? I think we talked about this, that Monaco is obviously one option to apply configuration as code. But we also have Terraform, and Terraform itself has built-in capabilities that are much more powerful what we have built. But Go templating gives us some of the power.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's cool.
And yeah, so I did link out to the template hub, which is going to again be Go templates, Monaco projects that support every single settings and configuration API endpoint with Go templating baked into it. And then I actually redid the SLO automation project that we worked on to support Go templating. And I didn't show that. I guess I could here. So again, we have a single project now, and in that single project, we have a config YAML, and that config YAML has some keywords that manage which SLO, specifically this SLI and this entity keyword, based on which values you have here, that will manage what the resulting SLO will be. So for entity, you could have a application or app method or a service or a key service. And then based on the SLI you use, either performance or availability, that will manipulate what metric selector is used to create the SLO for you. So you could have a single config file that could deploy hundreds of SLOs for different entity types and different types of SLIs. Maybe we'll do some more in depth on this project here. But yeah, again, looking at the JSON, it's pretty packed in here. But yeah, here you can see where we're using the if statements to dynamically adjust what metric expression to use, and then finally some more things to do with the entity selectors and stuff like that.
But this is exactly the separation of concerns where this file would be set up by, let's say, a site reliability engineer that provides SLIs based on a name like perf, eval, as to their engineers, and basically define what metric expression should be used. And then the engineers itself can then simply say, I want to have a perf metric on a particular service entity, like what you have here. And then it automatically creates the right SLO without the engineer having to know the exact metric expression. That's a really great use case. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
Okay, I think that's all I wanted to show about Go templating. Anything else you wanted to end off on, Andy?
No, that's it. I just want to highlight, there's a lot of other material out there when it comes to Monaco monitoring as code. You have done a couple of sessions on it, and we also had Nico Riedman, who is one of the lead engineers on it, doing a session as well. So if you want to learn more about Monaco monitoring as code, then check this out first, and then this one is definitely going to deep into the power of Go templating and how you can then make your Dynatrace configuration as code even more powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.